When you're a young whippersnapper, or maybe you still are, I never knew what the deal was about going to bed early.
It's a school night, so off to bed with you.
When in fact, all you need was 8 hours sleep. You were confined to bed for at least 10 hours. So when you woke up, you felt lethargic because you've had too much sleep. Don't forget, these are the days before you could sneak a phone into bed and watch videos and chat to your friends. All I had was 4 walls to stare at, with the odd cartoon picture on the wall, like Roadrunner. But when you knew it was nearly time for bed, you would pretend to become invisible, and not to make any sound whatsoever. You'd never try and speak to your parents, because they would be glued to whatever was on the TV, and any noise would trigger the words,
"Time for bed."
These days it works so different, because your parents are more interested in how many likes they can get on their latest post. Oh, this is what we had for dinner. Or, do you like my lawn? I just mowed it. And their hot conversation is that Dad's mowed lawn has 4 more likes than Mum's cooking. If that was now and I was young again, I would take myself off to bed out the way. But these days they just lose track of time and forget you sat there, and therefore a set bedtime would probably go out the window until Mum starts getting more likes on her cooking dinner post. At the weekend would mean you would stay up a little longer, and one Saturday that I'd recall was when I stayed up really late and watched the whole of a film. I had been down to the corner shop and got a couple of packets of popcorn for a fun-filled night of entertainment. I waited patiently for the movie to start, not knowing anything about it. Blob. The film didn't really start like that. The song used in the original film was, well, not great to say the least. But you got to remember, this movie came out in 1958. So at first I was really surprised that it was in colour. A sci-fi horror, or should I say it was meant to be. And it was described to be an alien substance that was indescribable, indestructible, and nothing was going to stop it. So this was the earliest memory of a film I stayed up to watch. It left a complete mark on my life. Now whether that was down to the very weak story, or the 1950s acting of the time, I don't really know. But it was a movie that I do not highly recommend, unless you really like classic films. It starred Steve McQueen on his feature film debut as a character named Steve. Now that was an original name to call him. And it also starred Anita Corsaut, or whatever. And she went on to make a mouth-watering 5 other movies, while Steve starred in over 25 films, including The Getaway and Towering Inferno, before passing away at the age of 50. Getting back to the Blob and the plot, Steve and his bird Jane Martin go wandering to investigate a meteorite that had just crashed nearby, and they come across some old geezer that has some strange jelly substance all over his hand and arm.
Oh, look, Steve, he's got goo all over his hand and arm.
I know, Jane, not sure what that is. Maybe you ought to give him some tissue to get that off.
We used it all earlier, Steve.
So they decided to take this old man to the doctor's. And before we knew it, the old geezer and the doctor disappeared. And Steve and Jane are convinced it has something to do with the jelly blob stuff. You two are coming out with some right wild story. Maybe you ought to just tell me what's really going on.
I'm telling you the truth. There is some strange goo. You need to call in the National Guard.
So you're saying there is a jelly blob that's going around this town?
You got to believe me, Dave.
Steve, my name's not Dave. Meanwhile, a little later in the film, when the blob has started consuming many of the town's residents, and while doing this, has got pretty big. The only thing that bothered me was the woman standing still. And screaming constantly, while the blob travels at a snail's pace. If she stopped screaming and just ran, she would get away from the jelly blob without any problems. I suppose if you put some eyes on it and a mouth, it could look pretty cool and less scary. Not that it actually looked scary, it just wobbled a lot. Anyways, this blob gets really big and gets so hungry it consumes a whole diner. Then the military have a good idea and pick up the jelly blob and takes it to the North Pole and they drop it there. Hopefully it will stay frozen forever, and that ends the movie. They didn't have a clue what it was, what it could do, but they thought keeping it frozen will solve the issue and we can forget about it and return to our normal daily duties. The only thing this film made me want to eat was strawberry jelly with some ice cream. And so the next day, that's what I forced my mum to make me. There has been a remake of the film back in 1988, and that film was dreadful. The acting in the original version wasn't Oscar winning, but it had some sort of story. Just the ending was like, we have no clue what to do with this big load of jelly blob. It can't be killed, Dave. No, so we will put it on ice. I keep telling you, Steve, my name's not Dave.